Could you erase your entire existence without leaving a single trace? In 1970, deep in Norway's Isdalen Valley, two hikers found a woman, burned, abandoned, and stripped of every shred of her identity. No labels, no documents, no history. It wasn't just a crime scene. It was a ghost story written in ash. A mystery so deep it defied investigation then, and still haunts us today. Welcome to the enigma that refuses to be solved. If you are watching this right now, I want to ask you something. How much of history do you think is actually true? Because what you are about to hear was never meant to reach you. These are the classified files, the buried evidence, and the forbidden stories that powerful forces spent decades trying to erase. If you are someone who refuses to accept the official story, you are in the right place. Subscribe to the Dark History Files and join thousands of truth seekers uncovering what history tried to hide. Welcome back. This is the Dark History Files, and today we expose a truth that was never meant to be told. Autumn arrives quietly in the hills outside Bergen, where the narrow Isdalen Valley cuts through dark stone and scattered woodland with little concern for the people who occasionally pass through it. Steep slopes rise on both sides, holding pockets of pine, twisted birch, and rough ground where fallen leaves settle between exposed rocks. The paths are uneven rather than dangerous, inviting careful footsteps instead of fear. From a distance, the valley appears almost ordinary, another quiet corner of western Norway shaped by weather, water, and passing seasons. A walk through Isdalen carries more than changing scenery. Damp earth softens each step while cool air drifts beneath the trees, carrying the scent of moss, wet bark, and fading autumn leaves. Small streams whisper through hidden channels before disappearing beneath stone, their gentle sound mixing with distant birds that call only now and then. The light shifts constantly as clouds move across the sky, allowing brief warmth before another stretch of pale shadow settles across the landscape and quietly reshapes every familiar view. Then something interrupts the rhythm that hikers have come to expect from this peaceful place. Two young girls moving along the hillside notice an unusual shape resting among the rocks. At first it blends naturally into the uneven ground, offering no reason for alarm. Curiosity draws them closer until scattered objects begin separating themselves from the surrounding earth. What had seemed like another patch of dark hillside slowly reveals details that no one expects to encounter during an ordinary afternoon walk through the valley. In that moment, the valley becomes something entirely different. It is no longer remembered only for its rugged beauty or quiet walking paths, but as the beginning of a question that would resist every attempt at resolution. Before investigators arrive, before newspapers search for explanations, and before anyone wonders who the unknown woman might have been, the landscape accepts one more memory without offering a single explanation. Its silence is no longer comforting. It feels as though the ground itself has witnessed something it will never willingly surrender. The first reports reached local authorities with very little certainty. A body had been discovered in the valley, but the details arriving over the telephone sounded fragmented and strangely difficult to arrange into a clear picture. Officers traveling toward the scene expected an unfortunate accident, perhaps a traveler who had lost her way in the rough terrain. The valley had seen injuries before, and difficult landscapes often concealed ordinary tragedies. Nothing in those first moments suggested that this investigation would become one of the most enduring mysteries in Norwegian history. As investigators moved carefully across the hillside, the scene resisted simple explanation. The woman's body rested among burned patches of ground and scattered personal belongings that appeared strangely disconnected from one another. Nearby lay items that had survived the fire alongside objects marked by intense heat. A partly melted plastic bottle caught attention beside damaged clothing and smaller possessions that no longer resembled the items they had once been. The arrangement seemed neither completely random nor obviously organized. Every observation invited another question before the previous one had found an answer. The condition of the body deepened the uncertainty. Fire had altered many identifying features, making immediate recognition almost impossible. Yet several details appeared unexpectedly deliberate. Jewelry was absent. Documents that might have revealed a name could not be found. There was no handbag containing letters, photographs, or ordinary traces of everyday life. The woman seemed to have arrived in the valley carrying almost nothing that connected her to another person. Even before forensic specialists completed their examinations, investigators sensed they were facing more than the aftermath of a solitary death. Someone, or perhaps the woman herself, had taken unusual care to remove the simplest paths toward identification. As the afternoon gradually slipped toward evening, the surrounding landscape continued its quiet routine while the investigation expanded around it. Photographers documented every angle before evidence was carefully collected and marked. Officers searched the nearby ground for footprints, overlooked belongings, or signs that another person had recently crossed the hillside. Each careful movement reflected the hope that the valley might still be holding one overlooked clue. Instead, the silence surrounding the scene seemed to grow heavier with every passing hour. Long before the unknown woman acquired the name by which history would remember her, the investigation had already encountered its first impossible absence. The most basic question of all remained unanswered. Who was she? The investigation soon widened beyond the hillside itself. Specialists examined every recovered object with the expectation that ordinary possessions would reveal an ordinary life. Clothing, personal effects, and burned fragments were cataloged with careful precision. Even the smallest surviving item received attention because experience suggested that forgotten details often carried the greatest value. Yet the collection produced an unexpected impression. The objects belonged to someone who had clearly traveled, but they revealed remarkably little about the traveler herself. The clothing offered no obvious path toward identification. Labels had been carefully removed from garments, leaving behind clean stitching where manufacturers' names would normally have appeared. Shoes, coats, and other pieces showed the same unusual treatment. Such alterations demanded time and attention. Most people never think to remove every identifying mark from their belongings, especially while traveling through unfamiliar places. Investigators considered whether this had been done to hide expensive purchases, disguise nationality, or conceal something far more significant. Whatever the reason, the missing labels transformed ordinary clothing into silent evidence of deliberate preparation. The absence of identification became increasingly difficult to ignore. There was no passport resting inside a forgotten pocket. No driver's license appeared among the recovered belongings. No family photographs offered familiar faces waiting somewhere for news. Even handwritten notes that might have carried a personal address or telephone number were missing. The woman existed physically before the investigators, yet almost every ordinary connection between an individual and the wider world had disappeared. It was as though someone had carefully separated a human life from every document that usually proves it ever existed. These discoveries quietly changed the direction of the inquiry. Instead of asking only how the woman had died, investigators found themselves asking how she had managed to erase herself so completely before arriving in the valley. Each recovered object hinted at careful planning rather than careless chance. The fire no longer seemed like the beginning of the mystery. It appeared to be another layer placed over an identity that had already been hidden long before the final moments in Isdalen. Without realizing it, the investigators had crossed an invisible line. They were no longer searching only for the cause of a death. They had begun searching for a person whose true life seemed to have vanished long before anyone discovered her body. As forensic examinations continued, the unknown woman slowly became the center of a case defined less by what investigators discovered than by what they could not find. Every completed report answered one question while quietly opening another. Medical specialists documented the condition of the body with great care, hoping that physical evidence would establish a clear sequence of events. Instead, their findings revealed a picture that resisted simple interpretation. Individual details appeared understandable on their own, yet together they refused to form a complete and convincing explanation. The surrounding ground received the same careful attention. Search teams examined the hillside beyond the immediate discovery site, looking for signs that another person had entered or left the area. Loose stones, patches of damp soil, and narrow paths were inspected repeatedly. Investigators searched for overlooked belongings, discarded materials, or disturbances in the vegetation that might suggest movement before the fire. The valley offered little in return. Nature had preserved its own rhythms, while quietly obscuring the moments that mattered most. Whatever had happened there had left remarkably few traces capable of telling a reliable story. Questions also emerged about time. Determining exactly when the woman had reached the valley proved more difficult than expected. Witnesses had not reported unusual activity with certainty, and the isolated location offered few opportunities for reliable observation. The landscape itself became part of the uncertainty. Autumn weather could shift rapidly between sunshine, rain, and cool evening air, changing the condition of the ground and affecting the fragile evidence left behind. Every passing hour before the discovery had slowly reduced the investigators' ability to reconstruct the final sequence with confidence. By the end of those early examinations, a subtle realization had settled over everyone involved in the investigation. This was not a mystery built around one dramatic clue waiting to be uncovered. It was a mystery shaped by careful omissions, scattered fragments, and unanswered spaces between confirmed facts. The unknown woman remained silent, and the valley offered nothing beyond what had already been seen. Even so, the investigation could not simply end. Somewhere beyond the hillside, there had almost certainly been a beginning to her journey. Finding that beginning would require leaving Isdalen behind and following the faintest traces of a life that seemed determined to disappear before anyone could understand it. The investigation gradually turned away from the valley and toward the unknown woman herself. Every unanswered question pointed beyond the hillside to places she had visited before her final journey. If she had traveled through Norway, someone had almost certainly seen her. If she had stayed in hotels, purchased meals, or spoken with strangers, small records of those moments might still exist. The search was no longer centered on a remote landscape. It was becoming a search across towns, railway stations, and quiet conversations that had seemed unimportant until now. Even so, the valley continued to shape the investigation in unexpected ways. Detectives returned more than once, comparing photographs with the terrain and reconsidering details that had first appeared insignificant. Different weather revealed different textures across the ground, and changing light altered the appearance of the rocky slope where the woman had been found. Each visit carried the hope that a fresh perspective might expose something overlooked during the first examination. Instead, the location preserved its silence with remarkable consistency, offering no clear indication of how the final moments had unfolded. Outside the investigation, public attention slowly began to grow. News spread that an unidentified woman had been discovered under deeply unusual circumstances in one of Norway's quiet valleys. The absence of a name proved almost as compelling as the unexplained death itself. Families wondered whether someone they knew had disappeared without notice. Travelers questioned whether they had crossed paths with a woman whose face they could no longer clearly remember. Across the country, fragments of memory were quietly examined in the hope that one of them might fit the mystery. Yet the greatest mystery had not even revealed its full shape. The unknown woman had entered Isdalen carrying a past that remained completely hidden from the people now searching for it. Somewhere beyond the valley were journeys, conversations, and decisions that had led her to this isolated place. The investigation would soon uncover luggage, false identities, and a trail unlike anything the officers had expected. For now, however, the story rests where it first emerged, among the steep hills outside Bergen, where an ordinary autumn afternoon introduced a mystery that would endure for generations. As investigators arrived, the valley's silence turned heavy. It wasn't just a death, it was a puzzle of fire and missing labels. But to understand the scene, we have to look closer at the contradictions scattered among the rocks. Why were some items untouched by the fire, while others were reduced to ash? The first close examination begins with careful observation rather than immediate conclusions. Investigators study the position of the body, the pattern of burned clothing, and the scattered objects resting nearby. Every visible detail is photographed before anything is moved, preserving a silent record of the scene exactly as it appeared that day. The arrangement seems complete enough to suggest a sequence of events, yet several elements refuse to fit naturally together. Instead of forming a clear picture, the physical evidence creates quiet uncertainty from the very beginning. Standing beside the scene brings an experience that official reports can never fully capture. The sharp scent of burned material lingers in the cool autumn air, mixing with damp soil and fallen leaves carried by a gentle breeze. Boots press softly against uneven ground while cameras click at measured intervals, breaking the natural sounds of the valley. Conversations remain low and deliberate, not because anyone has reached an answer, but because every new observation carries the possibility of changing the entire direction of the investigation. As evidence is collected piece by piece, small contradictions begin to emerge. Some personal belongings show intense damage from fire, while others nearby appear surprisingly less affected. Certain items seem to belong exactly where they are found, yet others appear strangely separated from the surrounding pattern. Investigators mark each location with increasing precision, hoping the arrangement will reveal its hidden logic once every detail has been recorded. Instead, the collection grows more difficult to interpret. Every measured step forward uncovers another question waiting beneath the surface. The deeper investigators look, the more they sense they are confronting something shaped by intention rather than accident. A normal investigation often gathers momentum as evidence begins connecting into a single narrative. Here, the opposite begins to happen. Individual facts seem reliable, but together they resist forming a satisfying explanation. The body offers undeniable reality, yet its surroundings suggest that part of the story may have been carefully rewritten before anyone arrived. Long before the woman acquires a name in newspapers, the investigation quietly recognizes an unsettling possibility. The scene itself may already have been altered to conceal the truth. The medical examination began with the expectation that the body itself would provide the clearest account of the woman's final hours. Forensic specialists approached their work methodically, documenting every visible injury, and every condition that might reveal a reliable sequence of events. Experience had taught them that the human body often preserved answers long after memories had faded and witnesses had disappeared. Yet this examination produced an unusual pattern. The evidence was detailed and measurable, but it resisted being assembled into one consistent explanation. Every conclusion seemed to introduce another uncertainty waiting just beyond it. One of the earliest confirmed findings was that the woman had suffered extensive burns. Fire had dramatically altered both clothing and physical appearance, making immediate identification almost impossible. However, the damage alone could not explain everything investigators were seeing. The distribution of burned material around the scene raised difficult questions about how the fire had developed and why certain nearby objects survived in comparatively better condition. Specialists carefully compared each observation with known fire behavior, searching for a sequence that matched both the landscape and the physical evidence. No single reconstruction satisfied every detail. Attention soon shifted toward evidence recovered during the examination itself. Tests revealed the presence of sleeping tablets in the woman's body, indicating that she had consumed a significant quantity before her death. This discovery immediately complicated the investigation. If she had intentionally taken the medication, what had happened afterward? If another person had been involved, how had events unfolded without leaving clearer signs behind? The tablets alone could not explain the fire, the isolated location, or the careful absence of identifying documents. Instead of simplifying the mystery, the medical findings expanded it into several possible directions, none supported strongly enough to stand alone. By the time the initial forensic work concluded, investigators faced an uncomfortable realization. The body had revealed important facts, but those facts refused to cooperate with one another. Fire, medication, and the unusual condition of the surrounding evidence each appeared genuine. Yet together they formed a story filled with gaps rather than certainty. Every specialist could describe individual findings with confidence, but connecting those findings into a single narrative proved remarkably difficult. The investigation was no longer searching for one missing detail. It was searching for the hidden relationship between details that seemed determined to remain separate, as though the truth had been carefully divided into pieces before anyone began looking. As investigators continued mapping the evidence, their attention turned from individual objects to the relationships between them. Every item was measured, photographed, and assigned an exact position within the scene. The hope was straightforward. If the placement of each object could be understood, then the final moments before the woman's death might gradually emerge. Instead, the pattern seemed unusually difficult to read. Several possessions appeared close enough to suggest a common sequence, while others rested in locations that invited entirely different interpretations. The woman's clothing became another source of quiet uncertainty. Fire had damaged many sections beyond recognition, yet enough remained for specialists to study the condition of the fabric. They examined burn patterns, folds, and surviving materials in search of clues about how the flames had spread. The results offered observations rather than answers. Certain areas reflected intense exposure to heat, while other sections appeared inconsistent with what investigators initially expected. None of these findings proved that the scene had been manipulated, but together they discouraged simple conclusions. Every physical detail seemed to resist fitting comfortably into a familiar investigative framework. Nearby objects added further complexity. Fragments of personal belongings lay scattered across the ground, yet the distribution appeared selective rather than entirely random. Some articles showed severe fire damage, while others retained recognizable form despite their close proximity to burn material. Investigators carefully considered whether natural conditions, shifting winds, or the uneven surface of the valley might explain these differences. Those possibilities remained plausible, but none accounted for every observation. The scene continued to suggest that visible evidence represented only part of a larger sequence that had already slipped beyond direct examination. By this stage, the investigation had entered unfamiliar territory. Detectives were no longer collecting evidence simply to identify what had happened. They were testing each discovery against several competing possibilities, knowing that one mistaken assumption could redirect the entire case. The hillside no longer appeared to be speaking with a single voice. Instead, it offered fragments that supported different stories depending on where investigators chose to begin. That quiet conflict between evidence and interpretation became one of the defining features of the case. The closer authorities examined the scene, the less willing it seemed to surrender a straightforward explanation, leaving every careful observation balanced between certainty and doubt. Investigators also began considering what was missing from the scene as carefully as what had been recovered. In many unexplained deaths, the surrounding area contains ordinary traces of daily life that gradually reveal a person's final movements. A forgotten receipt, a handwritten note, loose coins, or a familiar personal possession can quietly establish routine and identity. Here, those ordinary connections were strikingly absent. The lack of simple identifying material did not appear accidental. Instead, it suggested that someone had gone to unusual lengths to separate the unknown woman from the life she had lived before arriving in the valley. The search expanded beyond the immediate discovery site in an effort to locate overlooked evidence. Officers worked across nearby slopes, narrow footpaths, and patches of woodland, moving carefully enough to avoid disturbing fragile traces. They examined broken branches, disturbed vegetation, and impressions in the ground that might indicate recent movement. The uneven landscape presented constant challenges, shaped by changing weather and natural erosion. Even so, investigators expected that persistence would eventually reveal a meaningful connection between the body and the route taken into the valley. That connection remained frustratingly difficult to establish. Attention then returned to the possibility that the scene itself represented only the final stage of a much longer sequence. Detectives asked whether the woman had reached the location alone or accompanied by another person. They considered whether the fire had begun exactly where the body was discovered or whether events elsewhere had influenced what investigators now observed. Each possibility demanded careful examination because none could be dismissed through evidence already available. Rather than narrowing the inquiry, every reasonable theory seemed capable of explaining some details while leaving others unresolved. By the close of these early investigative efforts, an important shift had quietly taken place. The case was no longer driven by the expectation that one overlooked clue would suddenly solve the mystery. Instead, investigators recognized that the truth might depend upon understanding a series of deliberate choices made before the woman ever entered Isdalen. The body revealed the end of a story, but almost nothing about its beginning. Every missing document, every unexplained object, and every uncertain physical detail pointed beyond the valley toward an unseen history. To uncover that hidden past, detectives would soon have to follow evidence that extended far beyond the place where the mystery had first emerged. By the end of the first phase of the investigation, the body had revealed every answer it was willing to give. The medical reports were complete, the evidence had been cataloged, and the discovery site had been examined repeatedly from different perspectives. Yet the central mystery remained untouched. The investigators possessed facts that could be verified with confidence, but those facts refused to settle into a single, convincing account. Instead of pointing toward one conclusion, the evidence supported several possibilities, each interrupted by details that refused to cooperate. This uncertainty slowly changed the direction of the case. Rather than expecting the valley to provide one final overlooked clue, detectives began looking beyond the immediate scene. If the unknown woman had carefully concealed her identity before arriving in Isdalen, then the answers were unlikely to be found among the burned remains alone. They would have to reconstruct her movements before the final day, tracing the ordinary routines of travel that every person leaves behind. Hotel registers, railway stations, luggage storage facilities, and brief encounters with strangers suddenly became as important as the forensic evidence collected on the hillside. That realization carried a quiet but significant consequence. The mystery was no longer centered on a place. It was becoming centered on a person who had passed through Norway while leaving almost no reliable record of herself. Somewhere, she had purchased tickets, checked into rooms, spoken to receptionists, and walked through crowded public spaces. Those moments had once appeared completely ordinary to the people around her. Now they represented the only remaining path toward understanding a woman whose identity seemed to have been deliberately hidden long before her death. The investigation was about to leave the valley behind, but the questions raised there would continue to shape every stage that followed. Every future discovery would eventually return to the contradictions first observed beside the body on that autumn hillside. The physical evidence had established that something deeply unusual had occurred, even if it could not explain exactly what. Ahead lay a trail of carefully erased identities, abandoned belongings, and journeys that crossed Norway under different names. The body had refused to explain itself. Now investigators would have to ask whether the woman herself had spent her final days ensuring that no simple explanation would ever be possible. The medical evidence deepened the mystery. Sleeping tablets, burn patterns, and the haunting absence of a name. The investigators realized they weren't just looking at a crime scene. They were looking at a life that had been systematically erased. But the biggest clue wasn't in the dirt. It was waiting in a locker at the Bergen railway station. The investigation leaves the rocky hillside behind and enters the orderly surroundings of Bergen railway station, where several suitcases connected to the unknown woman have been recovered from a luggage locker. Their worn surfaces reveal little beyond the marks of ordinary travel. Leather handles show signs of repeated use, while metal locks remain securely fastened until investigators carefully open them. Nothing about the luggage appears unusual from the outside. Yet once the contents are examined, each case begins revealing a pattern far stranger than anyone expected. Opening the suitcases feels less like searching through personal belongings and more like stepping into a carefully arranged life that offers almost no emotional connection to its owner. The faint scent of stored fabric rises as folded clothing is lifted from inside. Shoes, cosmetics, and everyday travel items appear neatly packed, creating the impression of someone who valued order. Yet the experience quickly becomes unsettling because familiar possessions are missing the ordinary traces that usually make a stranger feel recognizable. As investigators sort each item, small discoveries quietly begin altering their expectations. Clothing labels have been removed with surprising care, leaving behind only clean stitching and smooth fabric where identifying marks should have remained. Personal belongings contain almost nothing that points toward a nationality, a family, or even a permanent home. Each object appears useful on its own, yet together they create the impression of someone preparing to travel through the world while leaving as little evidence as possible. The suitcases seem organized, but their purpose grows increasingly difficult to understand. The luggage introduces a different kind of mystery from the one waiting in the valley. There, investigators struggled to explain physical evidence surrounding a death. Here, they confront the quiet absence of identity itself. Every packed garment, every ordinary object, and every missing label suggests careful decisions made long before the final journey ended. The unknown woman begins to feel less like someone who vanished unexpectedly and more like someone who had been slowly disappearing by choice, one removed detail at a time, long before anyone realized she would become impossible to name. Investigators approached the contents of the suitcases with the same patience they had shown at the discovery site in Isdalen. Every object was removed individually, photographed, and carefully documented before being examined in greater detail. The expectation was simple. Travelers often leave behind quiet pieces of themselves through the ordinary things they carry. A receipt, a handwritten address, a laundry tag, or a forgotten photograph can connect an unknown person to a city, a family, or a familiar routine. These suitcases, however, seem to resist that natural process at every stage. The clothing immediately attracted attention. Dresses, sweaters, coats, and shoes reflected quality and careful selection, suggesting a woman who paid close attention to her appearance while traveling. Yet investigators noticed something deeply unusual. Manufacturer labels had been deliberately removed from nearly every garment. The cuts appeared neat rather than hurried, indicating that the work had been completed with intention instead of convenience. Tailor's marks and identifying tags that might have revealed where an item had been purchased had also disappeared. It was an extraordinary level of preparation for someone carrying otherwise ordinary travel belongings. Other personal possessions proved equally puzzling. Cosmetics, brushes, and small toiletry items suggested someone accustomed to moving from one hotel to another, maintaining a polished appearance despite constant travel. Several pairs of glasses were recovered, though they appeared to serve different purposes rather than belonging to a single prescription. Investigators also found maps, notebooks, and practical travel accessories. Yet almost every item seemed stripped of the personal details that normally accompany everyday life. There were no family photographs folded between clothing, no letters tucked into side pockets, and no keepsakes that hinted at meaningful relationships waiting elsewhere. As the inventory expanded, detectives recognized that the absence of identity was becoming its own form of evidence. The suitcases did not appear carelessly packed or abandoned in haste. Instead, they reflected deliberate organization shaped by repeated decisions about what to include and, perhaps more importantly, what to leave behind. Each missing label and every missing document narrowed the possibility that these omissions had occurred by chance. The luggage seemed designed to support travel while preventing recognition. Rather than revealing the unknown woman's past, the carefully arranged belongings suggested that concealing her past may have been one of the most important purposes they were ever meant to serve. As investigators continued examining the luggage, several objects began attracting attention not because they were unusual on their own, but because they appeared to belong to different versions of the same traveler. The collection contained practical clothing suited for changing weather, carefully selected footwear, and personal accessories that reflected frequent movement between cities. Nothing seemed extravagant or carelessly chosen. Yet the belongings resisted forming the picture of a single, predictable routine. Instead, they suggested someone who adapted her appearance with remarkable flexibility depending on where she happened to be. Among the recovered items were wigs, adding a new and unexpected layer to the investigation. Wigs can serve many ordinary purposes, from fashion to personal necessity, and investigators did not immediately assign any dramatic meaning to their presence. Even so, When considered alongside the removed clothing labels and the complete absence of identification, they encouraged broader questions. Were they simply travel accessories, or had they been used to alter appearance while moving from place to place? The evidence itself remained neutral, leaving detectives to consider several possibilities without confidently choosing one over another. The suitcases also contained foreign currency and travel-related materials that pointed beyond Norway. These discoveries suggested that the unknown woman had moved across national borders before arriving in Bergen, living a life connected to multiple countries rather than a single home. Yet even these clues revealed remarkably little about her true identity. Currency could indicate previous destinations, but not the reason for visiting them. Maps and practical travel items confirmed movement, but not purpose. Each discovery widened the geographical scope of the investigation while leaving the central mystery firmly intact. Gradually, investigators realized that the luggage represented more than a collection of possessions. It reflected a carefully managed way of living in which useful objects were preserved while personal history remained almost completely absent. Every suitcase seemed capable of supporting another journey, another hotel room, or another unfamiliar city without exposing the woman behind it. The contrast became increasingly difficult to ignore. The belongings demonstrated experience, preparation, and mobility, yet they revealed almost nothing about memory, family, or permanence. Instead of introducing investigators to the unknown woman, the luggage quietly reinforced the impression that someone had invested extraordinary effort in ensuring that every journey could begin without carrying the weight of a recognizable past. Investigators eventually began looking beyond the objects themselves and focused on how the luggage had reached the railway station. The suitcases had not been abandoned carelessly or left in a place where they might quickly attract attention. They had been placed inside a luggage locker, suggesting a decision made with planning rather than haste. That simple detail introduced an entirely new line of inquiry. Whoever placed them there expected the luggage to remain undisturbed for at least some period of time, raising questions about what had been intended to happen next. Station employees and available records became valuable sources of information. Detectives attempted to reconstruct the movements of the unknown woman before her final journey into Isdalen. They searched for witnesses who might remember someone carrying the distinctive luggage through the station, purchasing locker access, or moving between platforms. Bergen railway station welcomed countless travelers every day, making individual memories difficult to recover. Even so, investigators believe that repeated visits, unusual behavior, or memorable conversations might still survive within the recollections of people who had unknowingly crossed paths with the mysterious traveler. The more authorities examined the luggage, the more they noticed a careful balance between visibility and concealment. The suitcases themselves were ordinary enough to blend naturally among the belongings of other passengers. Nothing about their appearance encouraged special attention. Yet inside, the contents reflected deliberate choices that consistently protected the owner's identity. This contrast became increasingly significant. The unknown woman seemed comfortable appearing in public while ensuring that the objects she carried revealed almost nothing meaningful if they were ever examined by someone else. By this stage of the investigation, the suitcases had become far more than stored travel belongings. They represented a carefully constructed bridge between an unidentified woman and a hidden past that investigators could sense but could not yet reach. Every ordinary object hinted that she had traveled widely, planned carefully, and understood how to leave remarkably few personal traces behind. The luggage no longer seemed to be waiting for its owner to return. Instead, it appeared to be preserving a carefully managed silence. Detectives now understood that solving the mystery would require following the woman's movements beyond the railway station, into the hotels, streets, and quiet encounters where she had lived under identities that remained completely unknown. The suitcases ultimately changed the investigation in a way few pieces of evidence ever do. Rather than answering the question of who the unknown woman was, they demonstrated how carefully that answer had been concealed. Detectives had expected Luggage to preserve fragments of an ordinary life. Instead, they found belongings that appeared intentionally separated from personal history. Every completed inventory strengthened the same quiet conclusion. The woman had traveled extensively, yet she had left behind almost none of the ordinary details that usually follow a traveler from one destination to the next. As investigators compared the luggage with evidence recovered from the valley, a larger pattern gradually emerged. The removed clothing labels, the absence of identification, and the practical organization of the suitcases no longer appeared to be isolated curiosities. Together, they suggested consistent planning carried out over time. Whether those choices reflected personal caution, professional discipline, or some other hidden purpose remained impossible to determine. What mattered was the unmistakable consistency. Different pieces of evidence, discovered in different locations, all pointed toward the same deliberate effort to limit recognition. The investigation was now beginning to move away from objects and toward movement itself. If the belongings could not reveal the woman's identity directly, perhaps her journeys could. Somewhere between railway stations, hotels, restaurants, and city streets, she had interacted with receptionists, waiters, shopkeepers, and fellow travelers. Most of those encounters had likely seemed ordinary at the time. Yet ordinary moments often become extraordinary when viewed through the lens of an unsolved mystery. Detectives began preparing to reconstruct those movements one location at a time, hoping that routine travel might expose what carefully packed luggage had hidden. The unknown woman had entered Norway carrying possessions that were both revealing and silent. They demonstrated organization, experience, and preparation, but they refused to answer the simplest question of all. Instead, they introduced a new mystery. If someone could remove almost every trace of identity from the belongings they carried, perhaps they had also done the same with the life they presented to others. The next stage of the investigation would test that possibility by following a trail of hotel registrations, changing names, and carefully managed appearances, where one traveler seemed to become several different people without ever revealing who she truly was. The suitcases were packed with precision, clothing with the labels cut out, wigs, and foreign currency. Every item suggested a woman who was constantly moving, constantly changing, and constantly hiding. Investigators thought they had found the key to her identity, but as they opened the final bag, they realized this wasn't just one woman. She was a ghost who had walked through Europe under a dozen different names. The trail is widening, and the truth about who she really was is more complex than anyone dared to imagine. The journey to uncover her true face continues in just 48 hours.